It's really nice because there's already been a good background that set the stage in a way for me. I'm Aaron Lobo, and I currently work as the senior advisor with the marine program at WCS-India. And my work has been largely as a marine ecologist, mainly in my past life as an academic. But I work right now at the interface of conservation and development. So I come in at a very sort of a specific role. And I've been working in several coastal areas, both in West Africa and in South Asia. But one of the things I kind of enjoy the most beyond, just being out there in the field, working there, is actually fishing, cooking, and eating good seafood. So that's something that's very large. And I've got one overarching goal today, which is to kind of bring a couple of, we have 1 hour, one tight hour together, but to help you get a quick but meaty insight of what inclusive conservation actually looks like. The great part is it kind of also brings me to a little quote. Just listening to the Dibang Valley team and to Dr. V.B. Mathur sir speak, it actually brings me back to a very old quote by Jeremy Bentham, which is, while we reach for the stars, we often forget the flowers at our feet. And I think there's nothing wrong in aiming for the stars. Okay, the North Stars are kind of like our global targets, whether it is the 30 by 30 target, the OECMs, the OECM framework, how do we get to 30 by 30 from 22%? While we reach for these targets, it's very important because this is like our compass rider. It tells us that we are going in the right direction. We shouldn't forget the diversity on the ground. I think that's super important, and that's what the Dibang Valley team showed us really beautifully, that there's a huge amount of diversity, and not just in the ecology, but also in the nature-culture relationships, most importantly, and it's kind of handed down through these stories across generations, and this is something that's really important. So I think the whole point of this panel is to kind of bring this inclusivity kind of discussion into the discourse. And while we while we're sort of focused on the ground realities, focused with getting panchayat permissions sorted out, discussions with the forest department and the fisheries department, let's not forget our North Stars. But before I go into any deep detail, I just have a broad question for all of you here. Now, I know that many of you are from the field, some of you not, but just want a quick raise of hands. How many of you have been to a traditional protected area, wildlife sanctuary, national park? Please raise your hands. Okay, great. So almost all of you, which is great. And how many of you, I think the Dibang Valley team kind of gave it out for me, but how many of you believe that actually wildlife should remain within the confined boundaries of a protected area? Can you raise your hands? Okay, fantastic. I think I don't need a panel discussion. So it just takes me to my to the next session, which is the fact that we have a really a mixed, a diverse, and a very experienced team of panelists today. And many of them I know personally for a very long time. They've influenced my own work. They've influenced the work of many others. And I would like to invite them on the stage today. And I would like to start off with Neema Pathak. So Neema is a member of Kalpavriksh, where she spent decades working on community conserved areas. She's also been involved with the Dibang team. Her work has resulted in possibly the most comprehensive compendium or directory on community conserved areas in the country. And welcome you, ma'am. It's really nice to have you here. So the next person is also someone who's very important, also worked at the grassroots level on the ground. So all of you all know that the UN has declared this as a decade for ecological restoration. So we have another North Star to look forward to. But there are several people on the ground. So this is the second year of that decade of ecological restoration. But there are several people on the ground who have been working on ecological restoration using sound principles of ecology as well as community participation 2 decades earlier. And with us, we have Mr. Aman Singh ji. He has played a very important role in documenting and actually basically regenerating these community conserved areas in Rajasthan. Aman Singh ji, welcome. And he's restored about 140 of these orans, which are these community conserved areas. Then we have another sort of old colleague, friend of mine. She's the founding trustee of Dakshin. She works in a very different space. There's been quite a lot of terrestrial focus here, and we particularly brought Aarthi for this purpose because the sea kind of paints a very different picture. Things are very open access. Nobody knows boundaries. Aarthi is going to tell us where these boundaries lie. Aarthi, welcome. And our last and very important panelist that we've also heard a lot from earlier, he also happens to be my old teacher. He was the one to kind of bring about protected area management in one of my first classes, teaching me and Bindu over here the theory of island biogeography, what's the importance of having large versus small areas. A lot of very important issues were discussed over there. Please welcome Dr. V.B. Mathur. Am I clear? Okay, it just sounds non-audible. Yeah. I think it's on. They're all on. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with first, just a kind of a house rule to the audience is if you have any questions, please note them down. We've got a really tight panel and we want to try and stick within time, but if you have questions, please note it down because this is for your benefit and for the benefit of everyone here. So please keep these in mind. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions and we can otherwise take the questions out to the tea break. Ma'am, Neema, you've spent so much of time working on community conserved areas. And, first of all, can you tell us what these community conserved areas are? I mean, the Dibang Valley team did throw a lot of light on this. And how do they differ from the traditional sanctuary, national park or other protected areas? Even Sir did bring up quite a few of those discussions, but how do they differ from these areas? Can you throw some light on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Vidya and WCS team for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be talking with this distinguished panel today. So I think to address your question, Adam, the Dibang Valley team made it really easy to define what seascapes are. For the longest time, this was a term which was not recognized. Nobody really knew what seascapes are, but today it's a globally recognized term, including a Convention on Biological Diversity accepts this as a term and it has a definition. Basically, ICCAs or Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities Conserved Areas and Territories. So it has three main characteristics. A, that there is a community which has a very close association and interaction with the territory, land and waters. Two, not just the association, but there is also a local, formal or informal, written or oral, management governance system in place. They have rules and regulations in place, which could be very traditional taboo systems like what we heard with the Idu friends, or it could be responding to newer changes in the society, so new forms. I think the Idu friends had both of those systems illustrated to us today. So those areas when whatever the objective of these governance and management practices on the ground are leading also or also achieving conservation objectives are called ICCs. So I think you were asking me why it is so important and why how they are different from protected areas. So we heard Dr. Mathur say earlier on that whenever you and I think about what are those areas which are conserving, which are contributing to biodiversity conservation, we always think about wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, tiger reserves. That's what comes to our mind. We never think about areas like this contributing to biodiversity. Thank you. So basically, when we look at the wildlife conservation policies in India, they are with I think one word that our friends used is that we do not see humans and nature separate from each other. That's what they said. Whereas wildlife conservation, the way we envision in India, is precisely on this premise that humans are separate from nature. There need to be spaces for wildlife conservation and separate spaces for human development. So basically you set aside some areas and then rest of the landscape is free for plunder, and nature also becomes a kind of commodity. So to go to why these areas are important, I would actually go to the words of indigenous people and local communities themselves, which they have been asserting in various forums when they raise their concerns related to climate change or the biodiversity crisis that we are facing. They say that long-term conservation of biodiversity is not possible unless it becomes part of our culture, it becomes part of our everyday living, it becomes part of our worldview. And this is where they are different. So conservation with people. And if you just allow me 2 minutes, I would like to present 3. There have been lots of recent research in recent times and some reports that have been published which sort of corroborate this articulation of indigenous people and local communities. One of them is a report that was published in 2019 by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity, which said, despite all our conservation efforts over last many decades, despite billions of dollars going into conservation, more than 1 million species is currently on the verge of extinction because of human activities, and obviously also threatening our own basis of life, our own existence. The second very important report is by UNEP, United Nations Environment Programme, Global Environment Outlook report, which says that in last few decades, the number of protected areas, as we conventionally call like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and the rest, have consistently gone up to cover about 14% globally right now. But this has not really meant biodiversity has gone up significantly. On the contrary, the biodiversity, all at genetic, ecosystem, and habitat levels has declined in these last few decades. And the third report that I would like to refer to is a very recent spatial analysis that has been carried out by WWF and ICCA consortium, which says that globally there's about 21% of the area where such interactions that we spoke about still exist. Indigenous people, various communities, pastoralist communities, fishing communities, farming communities, which still are interacting with these resources, and 17% of this area can be called CCAs, where there is an active sort of interaction towards governance, management, and conservation of resources. And about 80% of biodiversity today survives in this area, and IPBES report actually says that globally there is decline of biodiversity across all ecosystems and landscapes, but the decline of biodiversity in such areas is much slower. So I think I don't really need to talk more about, there's enough evidence to say that recognizing such areas, learning from them and supporting them can be a long-term strategy for conservation of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think you made your point, extremely lucid. And I mean, you gave us this kind of macro overview. The Dibang team actually sort of spoke of their very sort of solid example on the ground where this human-culture relationship has existed for so long. And these stats were really sort of revealing. But I'd like to kind of take it to Amanji, who's also worked with CCAs called Orans in Rajasthan from 1992, where he's spent a huge amount of time restoring them. So first, can you tell us what these Orans are? Why are they so important when it comes to, biodiversity conservation? And why are you working to preserve them?
Thank you, Dr. Lobo. And it's good background given by Neema ji. So I'll take from there where Neema ji ended and supplement with an example of the Oran as Lobo ji asked me to talk about. Actually, Oran is again a CCA, as we heard the example of Dibang. Also, Neema ji discussed what are the CCAs all about. So Oran are basically a CCA, which is mainly found in Rajasthan. And there are many. I mean, if you see the numbers, there are about 25,000, which is not my figure, which is again the government figure, that there are 25,000 Orans, and the area from a few hectares to as big as 25,000 hectares. The biggest Oran is, which is in Jaisalmer district, Bhadariya, which has an area of 25,000 hectares. So you can imagine that how big areas they are. So basically, these Orans satisfy these three conditions which Neema ji mentioned. They are protected, managed by the local communities. And in Rajasthan, mainly who are these communities? They are the pastoralist communities. Raikas, Rabaris, Gujars, all across, very different to place to place. So these are the communities who have been protecting them, and they use them mainly for not just water or not just for grazing, but also there are several rituals and cultural values attached when they protect them. You would find some deity in each Oran, but I refrain them calling them sacred groves. Sacred groves somehow are forbidden for the human use. But here, these Orans are very much used by the community for grazing, for water. You would see there are number of different kind of medicinal value plants is still available, whereas you won't find elsewhere, and community are using. यहाँ पे कुछ राजस्थानी भाई भी बैठे हैं, वो अपने ऊँटों को कैसे ओरणों में से दवा लेकर, पत्ती लेकर उनका उपचार करते हैं, वो भी इन सब बातों को शायद जब अपनी बात कहेंगे तो रखेंगे. तो these are Orans are purely managed by the community. And why? Because they want to conserve the biodiversity and their livelihood. These two things go together, where in the morning, and as you all know, national park and sanctuaries, humans are not there. There's no space for the humans. Whereas in Orans, human is very much who is conserving, protecting without getting any outside support. Whereas in national park and sanctuaries, we spend crores of rupees to manage them. So these make the difference to national park and the Oran. So these are the number of things happening in the Orans. During last 2 decades, we have been, because it's not that everything went fine, because there was a period when there were different kind of legislation. Also, the policies have somehow impacted our Orans. Some of the Oran lands, because mainly these Orans are in the revenue category. As Dr. Mathur also mentioned, that if the sacred goes the outside, so many of the, I think most of, I can say in Rajasthan, they fall under the revenue category. Only a few come under the protected category. So these Orans, land of these Orans being allotted for other purposes. So there was a time when people feel alienated, that, oh, this land also being snatched. Like several Orans being taken away for forming a national park. Like if you take the example of Sariska Tiger Reserve. Actually, this is this is a integration, this is a combination of about 18 orans they put together and declared a tiger reserve. So there are instances where these orans and debony is taken away and gone to the different form of categories. So then people feeling started, alienated, some sort of degradation started taking place. And we about 2 decades ago started working, restoring these orans, again starting with the community that, okay, this is land belongs to you, maybe category different, maybe the government or protected categories, but these are the community lands which you can take forward, you can protect them. So we have done about 40 orans, restoration work, and keeping them alive, their livelihood and biodiversity. Both these things to go by hand together. So that was our motto while we were conserving these orans. And community, basically the community we were supporting. We are not, it's not that my organization KRAPAVIS has done all alone, it's the community. We supported the community and this done fantastic restoration work. And that's maybe next question which comes.
No, thank you very much, sir. This is actually very enlightening. You've thrown a lot of light into the diversity of practices that exist on a single space. It's not just about biodiversity. It's about human, culture, nature relationships, and all the stories that go along. I would like to come to Aarthi. Now, Aarthi, we kind of work. We work in a very different space. Okay, where boundaries are very difficult to define, but as part of this 30 by 30 target, we kind of need to move towards that. That is our North Star. Okay, so what in your impression would it take to kind of actually draw a boundary in the sea? What does it take? What are the challenges involved? I mean, you worked on resource governance for years in Odisha and in Tamil Nadu. Can you give us some of your experiences from there?
Thanks, Arvind. So I think nearly about a decade ago, or maybe a little longer than that, my colleagues and I, we began writing about how marine spaces need to be treated completely differently from terrestrial systems. And I think we even rather rhetorically and maybe even cheekily suggested that all these terrestrial people should learn from marine people and its own upside down kind of world, right? Like, because it's almost a bit of a fresh ground to experiment with. And I would say, I mean, like, with all this time that has passed, I think that that argument holds like way more water right now. And I mean, this is not so much an argument to say, for marine exceptionalism, that is undisputed, but it's more, I think, to just say that when you confront a marine space, the complexities, and I think even terrestrial systems, a lot of research is showing that they are also super complex systems, right? So I'm just saying that when you confront a marine system, the complexities hit you in the face. And I want to just point out a couple of, let's say, like points that we have to grapple with. Because we're talking about conservation, and we're not only, and conservation is a bit more than just area-based conservation. So the first thing is that with the marine space, anyone who kind of has looked at its history of use and its political, ecological, and social systems recognizes that, that seafood is more than just fish. There are other things that are food. And that has, that's a very difficult thing to accept, especially when you have to consider some charismatic animals as food. The second thing is that fish has become more than just food, right? And those of us, I think, who work on fisheries issues, which are kind of seen as different from wildlife issues, we know that fish is being used for multiple other things. Now, how do you deal with that? It's a conservation challenge yet. And the third maybe point is that, from the seas being seen as a kind of tragedy of the commons, there is a tragedy of privatization happening. And I'll illustrate this a little from, my work in Odisha, which is, Odisha, I guess many of you here know about sea turtles, right? So it's a site where the sea turtles are on the Wildlife Protection Act, and they're on Schedule 1, which means that any kind of hunting or fishing of this species is criminalized. So even including incidental fisheries. But this negates the fact, and there really have been no studies to look at how the consumption of sea turtles, which India also has had a tradition of, whether that was sustainable or not. Now, some of this already sounds like difficult territory, right, to many of you. But the fact is that the use of these species has been criminalized in the Wildlife Protection Act. But at the same time, the Wildlife Protection Act, which, for example, Dr. Mathur did mention those examples, right? When you create marine protected areas, you also excluded communities. But ironically, the creation of the Gahirmatha Marine Sanctuary in 1997, which is a slightly large place, it's about 1,400 square kilometers. It was created to protect the offshore congregations of these sea turtles, which are really oceanic species. So they don't only hang around in 1,400, they're all over the Bay of Bengal at least, this population. But the creation of this sanctuary was not, it was the geo-coordinates. Now, Aaron, you mentioned like, yeah, boundaries are hard to put on in waters, but you can create these floating buoys. The technologies and all are available. It's not a problem of how do you create boundaries. It's just that what you include, what you exclude. So when they created the Gahirmatha sanctuary, and we have documents to show this, that conveniently it was also shifted so that the Dhamra port expansion could take place. So, I mean, these are all long stories and we've written a lot about all of this, but suffice to say that a marine protected area, so the area-based approach is unable to tackle the complexity of networked systems, mobile species that move across such a large landscapes. And finally, they seem to be really like unable to do anything about, development projects, such as whether it is Dhamra, Setu Samudram, POSCO, the Great Nicobar, So these sort of, that's something for us to really think about when we talk about area-based management.
Okay, thank you, Aarthi. I mean, the thing about when Aarthi and me get into a conversation, it can just go on and I have to kind of control myself out here. But I'd like to come to you, Dr. Mathur, right now. So we've heard about these community conserved areas, the diversity of practices that exist there, the diversity of ecologies that exist over there, land use, stories, etc. So this global target is super important. That is our North Star. But how do we include all these? How do we align all these sort of different diversities into this? Is there a way to do this, sir? Could you sort of, recommend a position on this, sir?
See, I would say that C for convergence is the answer to many of our issues. Because if each one of us takes a position, I am National Park, you are Marine, he is ICCA, then we are never going to add on to our forces. Today there is a scope for every category one can think of. And there is no either or on that. See, in this discourse which I have been listening, you need to look at the spectrum. On one side, you have a very strict national park regime, which is geared for wild animals, conservation and so on, with very little scope for people and community. You may argue why, but let's not do at this point. Then you move on, there is a sanctuary. Then you move on, there is a community conservation reserve, and then there are reserve forests, and then we are now talking of, there is also one category in between the biodiversity heritage sites. Under the Biodiversity Act, if you have some very nice agriculture areas, you could also designate them under that. And then you are now talking of OECMs, which may not have any of these spectacular wild animals or plant, but yet they are contributing to conservation. So let's talk of India, let's talk of the globe. We need to look at this complete spectrum and then find champions for each one of them. So you still remain a champion for ICCAs. I don't want to take that championship out of you, or I remain whatever a votary for a national park or whatever, but we need to find spaces for each other. Because this vast country of ours has differential requirements, different traditions, and we also heard this mix of nature culture. So let's not try to bump off each other, see that what strengths we can bring in, learn from each other. And you heard me saying that I cannot, even if I like, try to undo the historical injustices which have been done. But let's commit ourselves that henceforth, when we try to expand our conservation space, we will not be stepping out on communities, on people, on livelihoods, and so on and so forth. So if we have this kind of an understanding gradually built in, and this is for our mindsets to come, then we have the technology, as you just said. I was also a little intrigued to think that how are marine areas marked and how sacrosanct they are or how difficult they are, but technology is available now. We need to think that there is a scope, there is a spectrum, and a country as wide and diverse which we have, there can be several categories of that, and we will employ, use, designate these categories. What I am trying to push is that this designation of a space as any of the categories, and we also know that there could be multiple designations. Take the example of Kevladev National Park, a national park, what is it called, a World Heritage Site over there. Take the case, the better example is Sundarbans. So tiger reserves, biosphere reserve, heritage site, national park. What prevents us from doing that? And there are takers for all of this. So if you want to conceive Sundarban National Park as a World Heritage Site, there are certain things that you need to do. If you think that no, this is also a biosphere reserve where people and communities become important, then you take up measures to help those communities. Then you say, no, it is a national park and it has a very important tiger population to conserve, then you take management steps on that. So this multiple management systems, this multiple designations, it may appear complicated, but that is what we need to look at, because there cannot be an either or situation for a country as big as ours.
Thank you, sir. You've summed it up really well. And at this point of time, I was just wondering if the audience, I could have a question or two from the audience. Could we have the mics around? Does anyone have a question or two? If not, we're going to go to our next session. But I'm happy to take a question to respond to the comments made by the panelists right now. So, anyone at this point of time? If there's one over there. Yeah, sorry. Could you please say your name, organization as well? Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. My name is Chintan. I'm a researcher in ecology and geosciences. I had a question. So climate change is going to shift the ranges and alter the state of our ecosystems in the next 20 to 30 years. So essentially what we're trying to target in a very confined area-based system of conservation is to conserve an area, but with the possibility that these areas are going to shift in ranges, including the wildlife, we're essentially trying to target, like trying to conserve a moving target in the future. Like how can we sort of develop either policy or thinking, to go towards there?
So who would like to take that?
See, I'll have a very quick on that. See, in all along in this discourse, and I was hearing her very carefully, she was saying some doubts on the space-based approach for conservation. Now I want to expand that part. See, there is also a very important term and a word and a concept called connectivity. This is, if you ask me today, one of the global issues which is affecting the conservation community is the concept of connectivity. Because habitats are getting fragmented, you already spoke of a moving target, species need to move. If they are coastal marine, they will move further. But at the same time, a new concept is coming up where we start looking at corridors and connectivity. So imagine an OECM which I described. There is a national park there, there is a national park there is a range of spaces in between. But instead of declaring between or adjoining lands as a park or a sanctuary, which is impossible to do, can we think of designated them as an OECM? So for 9 months or a year, you do whatever you want to do. Till for your 3 months, a species uses that as for a movie. So this whole paradigm of conceptualizing conservation also needs to evolve with time as we deal with this problem. And therefore, world over, I would say, as these 30 by 30 targets are being discussed, so are the concepts of ecological connectivity. And why just ecological? It is also sociological connectivity as well. So there are colleagues of mine who prompt me every time I open up and say ecological, they say, Dr. Mathur says socio-ecological. Agree. So I do agree that. So these are some of those evolving concepts which we need to look at. They're all there. Our mindset, our understanding, our perception, our visualization has to understand that we will also have to evolve as things change on the ground. I hope I have answered some bit of it.
Can we get a marine perspective, please, Aarthi? I'd love that.
I don't know so much if it's a marine perspective, but say it's a planning perspective. Okay, so this, I mean, it ties in with what Dr. Mathur is saying about connectivity, but so India has this matrix of legislations and planning and institutions that do all of this, right? So somewhere, so it's not the either or kind of question as it is being posed. It is about the conflicts that layering creates. So to give an example, you have this coastal regulation zone notification, right? So it's about like 2 decades of existence. Now in its design, it allows for this kind of flexibility. It is a spatial, but it's also a temporal kind of a conservation regime. It very well can meet all these OECM type of criteria if you need it to be. The problem is where it conflicts with some other development planning process, but otherwise there is scope beyond this WLPA or the wildlife prioritization of all conservation. You know, so environment is more than wildlife. So I feel like somewhere like internalizing all this, thinking about the institution structure that's going to be needed to do that. I mean, I just have one real super quick thing to add to what Dr. Mathur said about other being problematic. The term even other effective is problematic if you ask me, because what is effective? How do you assess that? You know, like, and so who's going to assess this? So are we to assume that PAs are effective when you say other effective? So, no, so many questions. Stay back after this.
Thank you, Aarthi. Does anyone have any other comment to the comments made by the panelists here? Bindu. Yeah, can we have the mic here, please? Thanks, Aditi.
Bindu from Pilot. Yeah. Run by the population. And then you have an OECM that is the CCA of the community. Right? And
Not clear.
yeah, sorry. So then you have 2 different kind of OECMs. One is the OECM of the Hero Corporation, which is a private entity. They have their legal rights over their land. And then you have the IDU, which is a CCA, which is a community-owned area. And if they are also considered OECM, what are the kind of entitlements they get to that land? You know, so tomorrow, nobody's going to come and tell the Hero Corporation we're building a hydel project here. So we're going to take your OECM. But they're very well likely to do that to the IDUs. So where is that protection for these communities which don't have so-called legal rights over the land? Where is that put into the OECM framework?
See, you have asked a very pertinent question, and I need a minute to respond to that. See, the moment we started looking at this concept of OECM, came this question, under which law? Okay? And we, for whatever reasons in this part of the world, first look at Kaunsa law. Not that we will follow that, but we want to just check. Okay? So, I realized that pushing at this stage a law or a legal regime to designate an OECM may not be such a good strategy. Because while law does many things, it takes away many more things. So this entire concept of OECM, and you remember, Neema, we have talked on that, is based on the premise that it needs to be voluntary, it needs to be consent driven, whether it is the Hero Honda Motor Group or the local community or the saffron growers in Kashmir. Each one has to be given two things, what is called as a prior informed consent, which all my social colleagues have been talking for years. Nobody actually does it, but you need to inform people. You need to have a very simple consent form that this is what you are going to get, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is what you are promising, this is what you are going to get in return. So this is essentially because if you want to, at a very early stage, see, national park sanctuaries have hundreds of years of background information and experience. OECMs, I was objecting to O, she accepted to E, we do both. So we need to look at a very different frame to look at. Not that I am ruling out a legal regime in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but I don't want to be bogged down at this stage. So what we are saying, you saw this slide I showed of the portal. That portal is MOEFCC NBA. Okay? It has some credibility, whatever you want to give credibility to MOEF, but it has. Okay? So the moment your site gets listed there, it is then counted as an OECM, or it will count as an OECM, and MOEF is then duty bound because OECM is a global movement. Immediately the World Conservation Monitoring Center in UK kicks in. As you want to designate your protected area, no protected area is a protected area till it appears in the WCMC database. Same thing is going to happen for the OECMs also. They need to appear over there. So we want to keep the process simple. We want to make people understand that some recognition is coming, although I'm hard pressed to explain what the local community will gain. But I can only say from my limited experience with the saffron growers in Kashmir, that when we approached them, they said, yes sir, our saffron is already sold worldwide. But if we can get another tag, you remember now the geographical indicator tag that we are talking, with the Kolhapuri chappals and whatever else you wear or eat. So it helps you in enhancing your livelihood, and that would be the interest of the people who own that part. So let's cross the bridge as it comes, step by step, little by little, not push into this legal regime or that legal regime. All kinds of laws are there, already there. We don't want to create a new OECM law at this point of time.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Bindu, for the question. Shama, do you mind if we keep that to the end, please? Yeah, I just want to move on here. We've heard about, and we've been kind of flying the community conserved area flag pretty high right now, and I'm sure everything comes with its own challenges. And what I'd like to ask Neema once again, I mean, can you tell us what are the main challenges that you face when it comes to community conserved areas, particularly in the line of governance, you know, and when you're defining areas, you know, what are the big challenges you face?
So I think we heard some of the challenges that Edu friends shared. So in our experience, there are numerous challenges, internal challenges. I think Aarthi talked about societies being complex. Internally, there are many societies currently facing the challenge of changed aspirations of young people, traditional discrimination, gender-based discrimination. So there are numerous internal challenges, but what I would speak about maybe 3 or 4 major external challenges which even further aggravate the situations that CC is facing. One of them is, I think, the current model of economic development that we are pursuing, which makes our society a highly consumeristic society, which means it puts enormous amount of pressure on our landscapes, whether these are mines or dams, infrastructure projects, and now when we are talking about climate change, in fact, the climate solutions like the green energy, mega green energy projects, so whether these are ORANs that Amanji may speak about or the Dibang Valley, many of them are faced with these development projects and many of them are actually resisting them as we speak. The second very important is the fact that I think what Bindu was talking about, many of these communities are not recognized, their effort is not recognized, but they don't even have rights to use, access, or even govern and manage these areas. So in the absence of any rights, how is their tenure secure? So which even further complicates so if there's a development project coming, there is no question of free, prior, informed consent. You're told that you don't even have rights over these resources. That also takes away from the experimenting with your own learning, making mistakes, experimenting with your own systems, internal governance, management practices. There's no space for that if you don't have rights and access, management, use rights. Except in case of now, because the Forest Rights Act has been implemented, so we do have examples in some areas where communities have claimed rights, particularly community forest resource rights under the Forest Rights Act, and we are seeing many examples where communities are using that right for effective governance and management of local resources, including localizing local forest-based economies. There are many examples coming. I think the third very big challenge is external interventions. I think the Dibang Valley friends again mentioned the conceptions we have of conservation, like large NGOs coming and having only one type of conservation on their mind, and they go to any area and thinking that that's the only way conservation can happen, when we have such diversity of examples and ways in which conservation can happen. Sometimes very good, well-meaning interventions can actually end up disrupting local institutions. Fourth very big challenge in these days is from party politics. Politics is actually seeped deep into, and whenever there is a local collective doing very good work, also gaining local confidence, trust, and thus has the power and the constituency, immediately the political system comes and they try to co-opt this system because they see their benefit in it, trying to concentrate power in their hands. So there are numerous such challenges, and I would just like to quickly add that definitely communities, and I think Dibang friends and Rajasthan friends here would agree that there are interventions needed in these areas, but the kind of interventions that are needed are friends with mutual respect, going to an area and helping where help is needed, not like this regulatory policing agency going and telling what is to be done. Like mutually learning and sharing and supporting community action. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neema. So I would like to take it to you. You've spoken about a lot of ORANs. You've said that you've restored about 140. Am I right?
Yeah.
And you said there are several that have worked and many that have failed. Could you tell us why are some of these failing? I think Neema again gave us a very overarching strategic kind of a framework as to why they are failing. The Dibang team also told us why certain things are the challenges they face. Could you tell us from your perspective why are these things kind of dwindling, and what are you doing to kind of safeguard it? And is it necessary to kind of hold these in place?
I think Neema ji has given a overview of it. But let me go to that question first, because that was very important question raised. Whether that was related to the OCM, but why I'm coming that question, because this whole issue of the recognition of the rights of the people on that land, and some kind of legislature about that land. Suppose, let me say, when the ORAN, most of the ORANs, they fall under the category of revenue category and under the purview of revenue department. So revenue department, whenever want, just without any consent, without any discussion, they just allot the land, to any entrepreneur, even to the mine owners. A lot of mining happening around these Orans. This is one of the biggest challenge now around the Oran, because there's no consent, there's no consultation with the community, whether they can be given the leases. Somebody come from outside, get the leases from the collector, and he started working there. So these kind of the challenges, you see, these all market forces, it's just not that. Because if we see the livestock species, the Rajasthani by here, they can tell कि कैसे अभी जो हमारे यहाँ ऊँट का हाल बेहाल हो रहा है, वो सब उसके कारण है. दूसरा, अभी जहाँ पे गाय या भैंस चरती थी, वहाँ पे पूरी तरह से बकरी आ गई हैं. तो this is the things changing, how the market forces are, changing this whole thing within there. So mining is one of the biggest issue. In there several Orans, in the name of the green energy, like Neema ji also mentioned, particularly in the western part of Rajasthan, Badmer, Jaisalmer, Bikaner, even up to Jodhpur, this whole solar farm, the wind farm energy, they all been established without any consent of the local people, even not consulting to the local panchayat, which supposed to be given some kind of NOC. So these are the challenges we are facing nowadays. These are so some kind of recognition when we come, because that question is very important, that if some new things is coming, what the people will get, how it will protect through them, right? Though there are some legal cases where the Supreme Court in 2018 given the directions that all the Orans of the state to be to be declared under as a deemed forest category, but nothing happened. The bureaucracy has not taken that forward. Like similarly, the natural heritage trust site that Dr. Mathur just mentioned, there's another scope where the people can go and declare them. A few six sites, Orans declared natural heritage sites recently, but nothing. So what I would say, this whole issue of the rights, the recognition of these lands. Otherwise, people feel they develop, they have been protecting for centuries, and somebody without knowing come and start mining, putting the solar energy, putting the wind energy. So all this is happening in so many Orans. So this is the biggest challenge. There has to be some kind of mechanism, some law in place. And I think we see, after seeing Dr. Mathur's presentation, though I heard earlier also his presentation, we see OCM something, a very interesting thing actually. We had a meeting with the community and we talked about it. They also see that perhaps it could be where we can sort of apply for. But because that question still remains, Dr. Mathur, maybe you respond later on, how can community be ensured that no other 3 years come again to that land? So that is my worry. And maybe here are some organizations, maybe I request, particularly Wildlife Conservation Society, that because there are such a big number of Orans, they may be mapped, properly, maybe GIS mapping and other ways. So at least community know, and they can be claimed that, okay, these are the maps, this is our land, we need to protect it. So these are few things, these are the challenges which we are facing, we are fighting for this, and yeah, this is happening. So I think if I replied to your question.
Yeah, no, you did. Thank you, sir. Aarthi, I'd like to come to you very quickly. So, you've spoken about the complexity and the challenge involved in the ocean. Could you give us like a sort of an alternate reality that actually exists in the country, which is a kind of a good example that we can look up? It doesn't have to be a traditional system, but is there a sort of, somewhere where kind of decisions are being making collectively towards something like, say in the Coromandel you had the Patanavars and the Padu system that existed. But could you tell us something along those lines, if you have a good example from your Odisha work or from Tamil Nadu?
I don't know if I have a good example of this. But I mean, see, so if I've laid out the problem as one problem is the commodification of these resources, and if another problem in the marine system is the Disneyfication of animals, I mean, I think the way that that you can kind of counter it, the only good examples I've seen is when you've allowed more people to get to participate in these questions, okay? Because this is, at the end of the day, these are political questions about who is allowed to do something, who is not allowed to do something. And I think that everyone understands that. So the good examples are the ones which have had the patience to allow for those democratic practices. And maybe, I mean, there are also good instances of, you know, where legislation has been reformed after a lot of, say, protest and so on, to allow new categories. And maybe like these two developments in the WLPA itself were considered at least as a win at some point. But so in the CRZ regime, for example, you have a small foot in the door where you had like district level committees which had 3 fisher people to participate in it. So I am a strong believer that conservation, for it to be effective, it has to be a bit of a long process. It has to be a good, healthy political process. And it has to be a democratic process. So.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Aarthi. So, question comes back to you. I just wanted, I wanted to get an idea from you. I mean, we've gone through 2 rounds now. I just wanted to know what are the broad sort of overarching principles that you could frame in this context to kind of tell the audience. You've mentioned the scales of grey. You mentioned the fact that, you know, we have these global targets. We got to scan globally but reinvent it locally. But can you give us your broad framing for this, sir?
See, this audience here knows all. My worry is what happens when I move out of the door. What happens when I meet someone next on the street? And therefore I come back to only one word, which is awareness. जैव विविधता संरक्षण के बारे में जागरूकता. That is the only thing which is required. And once this awareness and jagrukta grows up, everything else, then you and I are redundant. See what is happening in the society. Today, each one of us is getting used to a digital India. Now, can we go back? Can the government say कि अब passport digital विधि से नहीं बनेंगे? Not possible. So this is what we need to do. Even after 30, 40, 50, 60 years of effort, I would still say कि जो हमारे संरक्षण के बारे में जागरूकता है, जो अवेयरनेस है, वो आज भी बहुत ही निम्न स्तर की. और जैसे जैसे ये जागरूकता बढ़ेगी, हमारा काम अपने आप होते चला जाएगा. हमको कुछ नहीं करना. हमको जो साइंस करनी है, कंजर्वेशन करनी है, हम करते रहे. लेकिन उसकी जो मदद है वो तभी मिलेगी जब what we say in English, the man on the street, what I say, person outside this door, understand that what is being discussed here. If that happens, then those things will be irreversible. And that is the experience of all of us in the society when we talk of digital India. Once you have tasted the benefit of getting your driving license, your passport, your police verification done, you know how life-changing that experience can be. So that is what we need to plead, that is what we need to work in our own ways, that we will try to spread the spirit, the concept of awareness in whatever people that we come across. And once that awareness gets spread, it will have a multiplier effect. Otherwise, we will continue to discuss, continue to agree, disagree, feel happy or unhappy. It will not have that kind of an effect till we make a resolve that whether these are our children or our parents or whatever method and mechanisms we use, we will spread the importance and significance of why nature needs to be conserved. And the only capital that we need to care for is the nature's capital. If that part of understanding is made aware of to anybody, including मेरे साथी भाई जो मेरे अपने प्रदेश राजस्थान से आए हैं, उनको भी इस बात समझ में आ रही है कि कुछ चर्चा चल रही है, किसी न किसी मुद्दे के ऊपर विषय चल रहा है. They are evolved, they have spread their time, they are spreading the message, but we need to convert it into a kind of a mass movement where each one, whether you are from northeastern Arunachal Pradesh or you are from Rajasthan or wherever, you understand कि ये जो चीज़ है, जो प्रकृति है, इसका संरक्षण है, इसकी जागरूकता है, हमको अपने पास लानी है और हमारे को बढ़ानी है.
Thank you very much, sir. And with that, I'd like to end this panel, and I'd first like to give our panelists a big round of applause. It's been a really nice diversity of very honest answers. Thank you so much. And now we've got like 10 minutes for questions. So there were already some hands up before we stopped at the first point. Shama, would you like to go first?
Oh, I thought it had ended.
No, we have 10 minutes more, sir.
So this is more on a governance. I'm Shama from WCS-India. This is more of a governance question. Basically, when we declare, for instance, the heritage site, not BHS, but the World Heritage Sites or UNESCO tags, there's some kind of funding that comes in through them. I mean, usually like Ramsar sites, like there's some kind of an international forum where funding comes in. So is there something like that? Do you see that in the future for such OECM tagged areas that, you know, they might receive some kind of support?
First of all, let me put the record straight. No funding comes if you declare a site as a heritage site, as such, neither from UNESCO nor from government. But now you need to create a brand value. And that is what we need to work together to create that. The moment you put a tag, people then look, people register why this site is being designated on that. There must be some value system associated to that. And most of the values and money that you are talking is coming from tourism. See, there are very many people, I am first talking of the foreigners, who come to India with a guidebook, what to see in 3 days, what to see in 2 days, and what to see in 1 day. Okay? That is what, I am forgetting that, what is the guide called? There's a name to that. The Lonely Panel series, okay. Okay. So that is how the heritage sites world over are minting money. Of course, there is an element of responsible tourism there. So we need to create a brand value that this is a biodiversity heritage site, this is an OECM, this is a coastal protected area site, this is something on that. And then people would like to visit. And when people visit, you could then think of many things over there, and there are many models over there, including in India. And those of you who know Maharashtra, those of you who know Karst Plateau, they are doing it. Again, then it works to some extent, then aberrations start flowing. Now today Karst Plateau is suffering that there is too much of tourism over there. So these things will be there, but we need to create a brand value in the eyes of the people, in the people who live in that city, town, village, tehsil, that there is an orang there is a heritage site over there. When people come and say that it is not only Alwar that you need to visit Seriska Tiger Reserve, there are other areas as well. So that is the way it needs to work.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So, sir, thank you for your talk on OECMs, and I learned a lot. So my question is, if my community declares its forest as an OECM, what will the forest department's role in it?
Well, you want the role or you don't want the role? I will answer accordingly.
Sir, I just want to know.
No,
that is why I'm
see,
asking.
you need to look at ownership of the land. Who owns that land? If it is a forest land, it cannot be an OEC. Very clear. Because forest lands are not to be counted as OECs. They are already under the definition of protected areas. But if it is a community owned land, then two more things will kick in. your consent for that, on that, and your prior informed consent on that, and a kind of a simple agreement that you agree that this area can be declared as an OECM, ownership rights will remain with you, usage rights can be made available to whoever you like them to be made available.
My question, so it's going off what Sir and Shama asked about ecotourism, and I just wanted to say that when the pandemic hit, we realized that conservation having this market value is probably not the best way to think of conservation. So I just wanted to know, like, it's for everyone, like everybody on the panel, like, what else besides this market value can OECM add to conservation? In terms of for the people, like the Dibang Valley team also asked, like, my question in general is about, like, what can be added by the OCM besides the market-based value for conservation?
Who wants to take that? Aarthi, great.
I mean, I really don't know a whole lot about OECM, so I won't, I don't know how to make an argument then for it like that, but I would say that, there's some, so this conservation is also a bit of a relationship between the state and the people. So is there a certain recognition that can be negotiated there? So much more than, market values and you'll get this, so you'll get that, you can do this. I think, like Neema was saying, right, like there needs to be recognition of tenure, there has to be some forms of recognition which are countered by others. So that's the only value add that you are giving to a community. Whoever, private, if it is a rural/urban community, whatever it is, there has to be some sort of recognition of effort, whatever that might be. That's as far as I can think of, but it has to be, maybe it has to be valuable in their own eyes in terms of the strength it has to push back against something else. That's, I would imagine.
Just to add to what Aarthi was saying, I think to answer that question, it would also be useful to go a little bit back into the history of how this term came about. So, as I was saying earlier on in the first question, that initially whenever we thought conservation, we always thought of protected areas. And World Protected Area Database also only recorded the government designated protected areas. They were listed as conservation areas. So there was a lot of demand from the local communities and indigenous people, ICCAs, who were also going to CBD negotiations, and they were saying, we don't want to be declared protected areas because they have their own pitfalls and our rights are not recognized, but we also want some sort of recognition that conservation is being achieved in these areas. And these negotiations happened for a decade or so and eventually came into CBD as other effective area-based conservation measures. Basically what they were asking for, recognition of their effort without being declared a protected area. So this is how the term came about, and that's the value it serves. It gives you a recognition without having to be under any compromising legal system within a nation state. Unfortunately, sir, I have to say it now because that question came up from the Dibang Valley. Unfortunately, in Indian guidelines, because many of our ICCAs are within forest areas, which are designated government forest areas, and they cannot be declared OECMs because they are already being designated at forest areas. So, in fact, there should be a demand for a different kind of recognition for ICCAs which can gain recognition other than being a forest area or a reserve forest, which the government is already calling them. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for just one last question before we break for tea. Yes, we have a hand there, please. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Rohan. So I started my career actually with ecotourism, and during the pandemic got into conservation through an NGO. So I'm very new to all of this, but I do read a lot, and wasn't very keen to ask a question or give a comment. But after listening to some of the questions here, just thought I could share a little bit of my thoughts and probably ask the panel a question that would be related to this very pressing issue of OECMs and the the rights of the local people. So actually in 2017 I was working on the lion conservation program, and as most of you know now, there are cheetahs where there are lions. So that whole experience taught me one thing, is that although we are looking at laws and we are saying that these people should be given laws or the forest should be given laws, there comes a time where the laws also don't hold, because everybody knows that Kuno is where actually the Asiatic lions were supposed to come. Similarly, there were some other projects like in Panna, where they're joining two rivers and there are dams. So in some ways the laws were flouted. So one of the things that I started looking at was, if the market is so strong, can there be an alternative to this problem? And that's when I started looking at the carbon market. And I honestly feel, because some of the work that I've heard of is very commendable. Communities have power, scientists have power, but at the same time, we need market-based mechanisms, and that's where I feel a market like the carbon market can play a big role, because at the end of the day, whether you're a community or government, there has to be a financial incentive. A recognition or a brand value has its limitations, but until we start getting financial incentives, I don't think the scale of restoration or the powers against the development, whether they be dams or they be energy projects, can really hold true. So again, like I said, I wasn't keen to say much, but this is a thought I wanted to share. And if there are any ideas you have in terms of this or some experience, I'm sure the audience would be happy to know.
Someone would like to respond to that, sir?
See, my quick response is yes, carbon markets are important. If a system, an area, or a space is contributing to carbon sequestration, which can be monetized in some terms, why not? So eventually it is going to come, it's picking up. It will take a while for people to understand that, but I totally agree that there is no harm in converting or thinking of gaining incentivized system through carbon markets. Yes, definitely.
Just maybe I add one sentence regarding this. I think this is also a whole issue of ecological services which community receive. It may be the spiritual values related to the livelihood, it may be related to the health, may be related to the recreation. I think that is also very important, just not the economics, but if we look at all those factors are very, very, very important for not just for the community, but yes, for the larger or for the whole world, you see. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we're going to have to end over here. We've got a tea break now. I would like to give our panelists another round of applause, and to you audience for being a great audience with great questions. Thank you so much.